Hi everyone. Well, it's great to be here and to welcome you all to Frameless in the first of our panel sessions today. Now, Annette talked in her setup of the day about Seicho, what the word means, its connection to growth, and also that sort of relationship with curiosity and a willingness to learn. And so for me, it's really gives me great pleasure to welcome 4 panellists today from really different backgrounds that can offer us some inspiration from their collective experience and hopefully some advice on how we can successfully navigate the change that probably defines one of the most critical and exciting moments we've seen in this industry to date. So first up, we've got Maria, who is Chief Brand Officer of VodafoneThree and has been at the heart of one of the most significant mergers in the UK market, bringing together culture and customers and redefining what brand and marketing need to do as a result. And we've got Arjoon, who brings more than 20 years of brand and business leadership across FMCG, beauty and fashion, and is now helping to steer Coach through a period of brand elevation and growth as VP of Marketing. Then we've got Kate, who's Director of Client Strategy at ITV, and brings a broader view on how the nation's biggest commercial broadcaster is adapting to change. And then we've got Tracey, who's a futurist, founder and CEO of FutureMade, whose work focuses on how AI, identity, and intelligent systems are reshaping markets. And these are all issues that sit at the heart of what we're dealing with right now collectively. So welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this morning. I wanted to start really by zooming out and kind of getting a sense of the change and the impact that you're facing into right now. It's clear that marketing is being redefined at pace, and I think that's impacting all of us in different ways. So I just wanted to start by exploring that. Tracey, I want to start with you first, because as someone who thinks about the future and its impact, you talk about a new world order, a place where identity, AI, infrastructure, and governance systems are starting to shape how markets actually function, and that sounds quite profound and impactful for all of us. If you think about brand and marketing through that lens, I'm really interested to know what change do you feel is most underestimated in terms of its future impact for us right now?
Okay, gosh, that's a massive question, isn't it? So I'm so pleased about the theme of today, navigating change. I'm like, yes, somebody gets it. Because what's happening, it's not just about change, I think. It's about the very nature of change itself is changing. We're not just in this sort of, oh, it's another cycle, it's another trend or whatever. It's a complete and utter system shift. And I think for people to get to grips with this, we can think of it about the end of a world order we were probably, well, I know I grew up in, the post-war world order, institutions, hierarchical structures, things that are managed and controlled and ordered. That's all gone, I think we agree. And we've moved into a completely new system. Part of the reason for that is that we've chucked the internet at everything. And the internet is a network. Those are the properties, that's the property of the internet. And so it's completely displaced everything. It's no longer hierarchical, linear, institutional. The world is connected, interconnected, sometimes disconnected, and you can only navigate that world. It's peer-to-peer, inclusive, participatory. You can only navigate it. So one of the big shifts is, in the new world reorder, is that there isn't an authority, a locus of control, some central person you can go to for direction. You're in that networked system. It's always moving. You're a node in it, and you can never get the whole perspective. And so that is why navigating change and navigating that system is important. It throws out a lot of trends, like geopolitically, as we've just heard, you've got multipolarity with 3 big spheres of influence now across the world, interrupting supply chains, trade, exchange. You've got alternative economies and currencies working alongside fiat. You've got social unrest because of the illegitimacy around some of the kind of social contracts now. And into all of that tension steps AI, which is a new technology and a new cognitive kind of tool, if you like, although I would argue it's in a whole environment. And so really, I think what brands need to do in amongst all of that, it's not really about persuasion, it's not about persuading people anymore, it's about orientating them. How can you help somebody, a customer, a person, a colleague, understand the new world that they're in, orientate them, and help them make sense of it. So I really think for brands, to cut to the chase, is that it's about sense-making for their customers and around the whole system, if you like.
Brilliant. Thank you. Kate, what are your thoughts?
I'm really taken by your description of the New World Order being networked, because I think one of the things that really struck me when I moved into TV as an industry was how extraordinarily networked it is.
Yeah.
So, you know, we operate at ITV where our biggest customer is also our biggest competitor, that's Sky, and where actually the future of the industry is going to be fundamentally based on how well we collaborate. And collaborating really closely with your competitors is not easy. So it's a really interesting world when actually you sort of think about it as being that kind of network place. It's I think those new skills of how do you navigate that complexity, how do you find a way through a structure that feels very unfamiliar. And as a brand, I think one of the things that actually I really kind of worry about for the future of brands is in a world that feels increasingly fragmented and where there's a real tendency to try and, you know, for example, take your content and slice and dice it into a million different bits. What does a brand mean in that world? Because actually brands by definition are about shared understanding and shared experience, and trying to work out how you do all of that and how you deliver that in this kind of networked world, I think is a really interesting challenge. And of course, the speed at which it is changing is unlike anything we've ever seen. So, you know, there's that great phrase, I think, isn't it, which is that change happens gradually and then suddenly all at once. And I think we're in the suddenly all at once phase. So it's phenomenally terrifying, and at the same time, I think really exciting, because, you know, whenever there is change, there is opportunity, and I guess that's the way that you try and approach it in a positive way.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you know, we definitely see change as opportunity and something we should embrace. Maria, what are you noticing in your organisation in terms of those big impacts?
I think the key for me is the notion of change always had you believing it's a moment in time and then there'll be a moment of calm. And for me, I think that's gone. It's just a constant rolling adaptation of where you're going all the time. And I sometimes grapple with that idea of change because it feels like you had a plan and now you have to change it. It sort of is what it is. So what we're trying to do is how do you at least get a point of view, not a plan, because I think plans make you think like you've now nailed it and now it's going to happen. So how do you develop a point of view that you then have enough agility to be able to adapt to? Even going into the merger from VodafoneThree, we all knew there was a playbook coming out of the integration team. And the first thing we learned on day one is that playbook no longer exists. It's all open for debate and conversation again. Yeah. So it's having enough of a point of view to get you going, because otherwise you have paralysis, but also enough flexibility to realize it probably won't end up as you predicted, and that's okay. And you just keep riding those waves, because I don't foresee an end in sight anymore. No. The pace of them will change, as in faster, slower, but they're going to keep coming.
It's just the norm now, isn't it?
For me, it's just the norm, yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Arjoon, what about you? You've worked in different categories, and obviously you're particularly involved now. What are you noticing in your organisation?
Coming in from after 20 years of fast-moving consumer goods where change is the norm, and then now coming into fashion and retail, I think, the fact is it's known to be cyclical, and we've gone through a massive change here at Coach, right? I think, a few years back we were your mother's handbag. And now the change we've gone through systematically with clarity is the fact that we moved into being the handbag that it girls and Gen Z love. And again, this is only really made possible by embracing the modern new techniques of marketing, if you will, and brand building, which is co-creating with community. That's something we're doing well, and that's certainly something that is going to be how modern marketing and how brands are going to have to operate. And the other thing, we have to totally, absolutely lean into is the power of cultural capital. And the fact that, moving at the speed of culture is something consumer-facing brands certainly have to adapt to and keep getting better at.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's really clear. I mean, we talk about these big changes going on. I suppose from our point of view, as these shifting sands are happening, there's a shifting role for leadership, right? And what's really interesting is particularly when you look at the role of CMOs, the data we've done in terms of our global survey of CMOs, it is showing that the role of CMO or the role of marketing leader is widening daily. You know, you've got 50% of marketing leaders now involved in some form of wider organisational transformation. But right at the heart of that is a really interesting tension, because we're all here to deliver numbers in the here and now and growth in the here and now, but also transform in the long term. So this is interesting tension between performance, or perform and transform. It's a tricky one to manage. I'm interested to know how you handle that. Maria, because you've been navigating one of the most complex mergers out there at the moment, transformation is obviously a big part of what's going on in your business. How has that tension between perform and transform reshaped your role and the function of marketing overall at VodafoneThree?
So going from a singular focus on a singular brand, and we did have Voxy brands in our portfolio brands, just you immediately have to change the way you operate, because you cannot have the same attention on 5 things as you had on one thing. But the one thing we did in the merger, right or wrong, these things, they're all points of view, is we sort of separated the long term from the short term so that people didn't have to balance that. So we had a BAU team whose job was to ensure the foundation of the business remained solid. And then we had an integration team whose job it was to make sure we're getting ready for tomorrow. We're now at the face of all of that coming together, and there's a point where it's no longer integration, it needs to become BAU. It's taken us 9 months to get here, it's relatively quick. If I did it again, would I do it that way again? Probably, because I think there's a degree of focus that teams need, and a little bit of stability and all of that. But it relies on a huge degree of trust. While we were going through the merger, we couldn't talk to the integration team for legal purposes, but you've got to trust they're doing the right thing, and the assumptions that when you pick it up and you have to start implementing it, you've got the tools that you need to do. So it's a matter of trust, and I think a matter of focus. And I think there is a period where people need to do separate, and then there's a point of view when those come together.
Yeah, it's interesting. Marketing as a force for stability is quite an interesting one, internally and externally. That's there's an important role to play there, isn't there? Arjoon, you've led brands through different categories and economic cycles. Clearly, Coach has been through a bit of a transformation historically. How do you balance up short-term sales pressure and long-term change as a leader in your business?
I think it's fairly simple in the fact that you have to be very explicit in knowing the job that each dollar does for you. And that kind of in every way defines where the long and short of it sits. So if you think of the fact that growth or performance marketing is about today's sales and drive and chasing that demand creation, there's also the brand building side, which very much is about the future. It's about fueling brand growth, fueling brand equity. So everything you do from a short term, right, it's to ensure that we're not getting overbuoyed by short-term optimism and compromising on long-term equity. And equally, when it comes to driving long-term equity and brand building, ensuring that's always tying back to commercial objectives.
Yeah, that's to get that clarity and making sure you're focused on both things equally and clearly between the different functions and capabilities in your teams. Obviously, really important. Kate, as a media organisation that's been through a lot of change clearly over the last years, I'm sure this tension, particularly as you're a really sales-orientated business, this tension between short and long term really hits home. How have you made that work at ITV?
I think probably the best way to answer this question is with an example. So I look after something which we call the Measurement Innovation Team, which you might realise is MIT in short, which is our little kind of internal joke. And that team's mission is to measure all of the value that TV advertising creates for all of our advertisers. So they are literally inventing new ways of measuring the impact of TV advertising. So for a long time, to be really honest, we've done a very bad job of helping our advertisers measure the value that they get. And that was because almost we didn't need to. It was kind of obvious in the old world, in the simple world. You just, you put your brand on telly and you saw good stuff happen. And that still very much happens. But actually, what we are doing is trying to build a new measurement system for TV that enables us to have much more powerful conversations with advertisers. But this is a huge investment for us. Right? I work in the sales team. We're meant to be about bringing in revenue, but I look after the biggest cost center in commercial, and that's quite a tricksy place to be sometimes. So what do? Well, we have 7 or 8 different programs that sit underneath that kind of overall department. Some of them have really long-term ambitions, and they are literally pipe dreams. So we are inventing new techniques to measure, for example, the impact of TV advertising on price elasticity. That's really hard to do, costs quite a lot. There's no world in which that is going to pay back in the next 6 months. But what we also have is sort of programs within that overall system that are all about bringing in the cash tomorrow. So what I've learned kind of the hard way is if you sit on top of a big cost center, being able to say, I know this bit isn't going to pay back in for a few years' time, but actually overall, because of the stuff we're doing that's bringing in the cash tomorrow, there's a positive return on investment, is the way that we manage it. So I basically say to our finance director, look at the ROI that you're getting this year, but actually, that's for the whole program. This bit isn't making money yet, but this bit is definitely bringing it in. So it's kind of having real clarity about the objectives of each part of that program and the timescales over which they'll deliver. And I think, to Maria, to your point, being really clear about that with the team so they know which bits are short term and who's bringing in the cash tomorrow and who's got the kind of mission to basically make it happen for the future is the way in which we manage it.
Brilliant, thank you. And Tracey, what would you offer in terms of a wider advice in terms of how to balance up that tension as we move into this world of accelerating change?
I suppose I always use the zoom out, zoom in model. That's kind of my job, I suppose, toggling between different time horizons. So I'm always going to say, don't have a 3-year plan, don't have a 5-year plan. I know. But have a 20-year plan. You're out 20 years trying to create a vision for what, not just what your brand is like, what are people doing, what's the world like, what are markets like, just create that. There's lots of probable and plausible futures, and one increasingly has to be rehearsing those, if you like, because that's the network sort of ever fluid, agile, decentralized world we live in. So you've always got to be rehearsing those because events will take you in one direction or another, but you've got to have a preferential future and use that to dictate what are the top 2 to 3 priorities you want to do in the next 12 to 18 months. So you're always toggling between the zoom in of the present and the zoom out of the future. And it's actually that dynamic, not a particular time horizon. It's the constant moving between the two. Yeah.
You use the word priorities, which very usefully sets me up nicely for my next question. It's almost like we're prepared. I think for me, if we play this world of change forward to 2030, and then consider how businesses and brands can win, it's clear that we need to make choices now and set priorities now that can help us to do that. We've got to think carefully about the things we choose to let go of, because that's more important than ever. We've got to make the right choices now to set us up brilliantly for the future. So I'm interested a little bit on capability and what the big capability and talent bets are that we should be making now to help us stay ahead in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. Arjoon, if I can come to you first with your thoughts on that one.
Sure. I think I want to share an interesting perspective I read today, and it's basically, we're at that stage in our industry where it's almost impossible to predict where the next 5 years are going to be. What our job's going to look like, how our social interactions going to look like. So there's essentially 3 things, I think, more broadly, that all of us as marketers, as leaders, as humans need to pretty much focus on to keep us, I want to say, lockstep ahead of where AI can't come in. It's head, basically your intellectual skills. It's heart, your soft skills. And then finally hand, which is kind of your motor skills. And that's kind of a starting point. Now, let's break that down in terms of marketing, brand building, etc. I think simplistically, it's what I call we brand and, right? It starts with your people. First and foremost, it's about ensuring we're powering up the people and building for a culture where we drive that capability. It's if you're consumer-centric and brand, it's about ensuring that you are ring-fencing investment for brand building, because that's got to be front and center amidst everything. And then everything we do is an and. It's not a compromise anymore.
Yeah.
So in terms of skills and capabilities, I'd probably say, three things that really stand out to me. Firstly is curiosity, right? I think that as a trait is one that we would absolutely want to nurture in teams and people and leaders. It's that consumer obsession, it's that consumer empathy, because that's not something AI would ever be able to replace. And then, the third piece is critical thinking. And then follow it down with what we call is a simplification strategy. Do less, more, but do it better, and just do it with ruthless conviction.
Yeah, ruthless conviction's a good expression. I like the idea of building the right softer skills around being ready to deal with change. Kate, what are your thoughts on the capabilities? If you think about, obviously you're slightly different side of the equation than we're working in, because obviously you're a key partner to us. What are you thinking about in terms of capabilities and talent in terms of that 5 to 10 year view?
So I have always said the number one, I guess, if not capability, then characteristic I look for in people and have always done is curiosity. I think if you're curious about stuff, you are by definition going to learn stuff, you're going to be leaning into the change, you're going to be looking for those opportunities. Yeah. And I guess, and the phrase that, so funny, if one of my team was talking about AI and how we do more to encourage all of our teams, some of whom are quite scared about the future, we all are, aren't we, quite scared about the future and what it means for the knowledge economy and their jobs. And he said, if there's only one thing I could get them all to do, it would be to play like they were an only child, which I think is the most brilliant thing. It stuck with me. And for those of you who are only children, I'm an only child, what you know is you have to make your own friends, you have to make your own play, you have to be imaginative. And actually, that is such a great mindset to take to a world that is changing this quickly, which is to just think about if you had to make it up all yourself, if you couldn't go and talk to people, if you had to create those imaginary friends, how would you play? What would you ask them? How would you explore? What would you learn? And so I think the kind of capability, if I was thinking about it for the future, is people who can play like their only children. That's a really good one to take into the world, I think. Yeah,
it's really interesting that both Arjoon and you are sort of moving towards, how do you create a culture that's ready for this? Which leads me on really to my final question, because I think, navigating change comes down as much to a culture of courage and bravery and experimentation. I'm interested to get any insights we've got on how we'd encourage marketers to be braver over the next few years, to kind of lean into that opportunity. Maria, obviously cultures must be a big thing that you're thinking about. How are you kind of dealing with that in terms of your organisation?
I think it boils down to two elements of transparency. So do you have visibility on the right information of what's working, not working, and are you facilitating the right conversation so that the things that are not working are brought to the surface? And then you've got to have an element of trust as well. And that's quite difficult as brand marketer. You cannot control it all anymore, and you sort of have to trust the teams, trust the process, trust the AI, trust the agencies, because you can't have full control. So those are two elements we look at. How do we keep that information front and forward? And then how do you trust those with the most information? It's something I always remember when we had an opportunity to visit McLaren. And what they say is they have 24 engineers, if I remember it correctly, sitting back in head office. And they put the power in the hands of the people who have the most information to make the right decision at the right time. Yeah. And I think there's a lot that we need to change. The sort of control that you want to have as a brand marketeer, you can't have. You need to know what your brand stands for. You need to know the frameworks and the boundaries. But within that, you've got to sort of trust that people will make the right decision with the right information in order to keep it going. Otherwise, you're just too slow.
So there's a big piece about empowerment and distributing responsibility there, isn't there?
Correct.
Tracey, as a final point, what would you offer in terms of building that culture to make the most of this world?
Well, actually, in terms of both those last points, culture and capability, it's all about adaptability. It's about the adaptability quotient. So organisations in particular used to look for IQ. And then, do you remember over the years that turned to EQ? Everybody wants EQ, empathy, and now it's AQ. And for quite a while, although it's now becoming quite mainstream, people have been searching for what is the AQ, the adaptability quotient. Because in a decentralised world, you can have lots of alternatives swimming around at the same time, and you have to be really, really adaptable. It's completely trainable. You can learn it, but you can also audit for it. So if you're going for another job and somebody used to say to you, tell me about a time when you did X. Now you're going to be asked, what if X? What if Y? What if Z? You know, it's all about building out those scenarios, thinking from the future back, not relying on the past for patterns of behavior. And so, you know, you can work with companies that I do this, work with companies that can audit, can train you and coach you to be more adaptable, because if you are adaptable, in a sense, it doesn't really matter what's coming from events in the future. You can adapt the future to suit you, and that's probably, I'm just going to end on your theme, that's probably the best way to navigate change.
I don't think I could.
It's true.
Well, thank you. I don't think I could do a bit better summary of what we're trying to communicate today than that. Listen, thank you so much to all of you for your time today. I hope that everyone here has found that useful and given them some things to think about in terms of what we're facing into, how we deal with those tensions between perform and transform, and some of the things we need to think about when it comes to capability and culture in terms of navigating this world of change. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to my panel. Thank you very much for contributing today, and thank you everyone for listening.